This is Tom Green in the 9 newsroom. We are reporting now that Saul Pais, the 18-year-old from South Florida that the massive manhunt has been underway for, has been located near Echo Lake, near the Echo Lake Lodge. There's a massive law enforcement presence there as well. Of course, this has really created some issues for 24 hours now, ever since police did, in fact, let schools know yesterday. And then all of a sudden, there were all those lockouts at many metro area schools. Today, hundreds of thousands of students didn't go to school for fear that Saul Pais, who was said to have had an infatuation with Columbine, according to the FBI, was on the loose, had purchased a gun, come to town, and might have been willing to do something very dangerous. But now we are reporting that Saul Pais has been located by law enforcement up near Echo Lake. That is just west of Evergreen, up near Mount Evans, near the Echo Lake Lodge. This is the image that police were handing out yesterday, trying to locate and identify her. The description of her day yesterday by police last night involved her flying into DIA, going to a store, buying a pump-action shotgun as well as ammunition, and then basically disappearing into the foothills. The massive manhunt to try to find her had been ongoing already, and it certainly ratcheted up as the public became aware of what they felt could be a credible threat to schools and students in the metro area. Well, at that point, the massive manhunt continued through the night, and now reports coming in that she has, in fact, been located up near the Echo Lake Lodge. We have news crews on the way trying to gather the latest. There is a massive police presence as they are trying to secure her and make sure that she is taken into custody. Of course, this is a week of sensitivity here in Colorado, even around the country. It has been 20 years since the Columbine shootings, April 20th, a Tuesday afternoon in 1999. 12 students and a teacher died, and apparently this is a young woman who was born after that fact, who developed some sort of infatuation with what happened at Columbine, and seemingly police feared had come here to do something to add her name to the list. With an abundance of caution yesterday and with that massive manhunt, all of those schools went into lockout in the metro area, and then a difficult decision was made with police in concert with different school systems to not have the schools open today, to keep students at home. And now word is that Saul Pais has in fact been located. So it's been quite a 24 hours around here, as you might imagine, for people who were here for the events of Columbine, and every year since that, this week has been one of great sensitivity. This 20th year, it certainly seemed that more people were more concerned, more security was being ramped up at Columbine, and certainly much more sensitivity as well. But we are reporting now that 18-year-old Saul Pais has been identified and located, and we are trying to now get information as to what in fact has happened with her up at the Echo Lake Lodge near Mount Evans. So we are continuing to gather information, news crews on the way, and much more information is coming in. My colleague Chris Vanderveen is joining me now with more information, and we'll get you plugged in here, and you can tell us what you know at this point about Saul Pais and what's happening right now up at the Echo Lake Lodge.
Yeah, Tom, this obviously changes pretty much everything in terms of what's been going on throughout the day. We know that there's been going a massive manhunt, really almost for 24 hours now, and this really sort of changes the dynamic, obviously, for school districts, for parents all over the metro area. There isn't a lot of information that's in right now, but we know that this scare is now officially over in Colorado, which is great news.
Yeah, it really is, because it led to the what-if scenarios that everyone had to identify. Both law enforcement, school systems, and individual families all had to make decisions just basically in the dark.
And there really was that wonder of how long could this go?
Right.
For school districts not wanting to have to face another day of having to make that decision overnight, how long could they go without having to make that decision? Would we be talking about Thursday closures of schools? Would we be talking about Friday closures of schools? This also, the area where she was sort of found this morning suggests that this is what we have been hearing last night, is that this was an area where she was dropped off at yesterday.
Right.
It suggests to me that she had not left that area and had been, in fact, in that area for quite some time. And that's a day because there were some sightings around the Denver metro area yesterday of Sol Pais potentially around various schools. And that's what happens with these type of scenarios. You put a picture of a face out there and you start to get sightings all over the place. Now that this has been confirmed, it suggests that she'd been up there for quite some time. And again, the threat, which we didn't know, was sort of limited to that area. The problem was we didn't know that all day yesterday, and so all of these schools had to go out on lockout yesterday, and now all the schools were closed today.
Chris, you were here, and we talk about April 20th, 1999, and what it means to people who were here. And I've always wondered about what it means to people who weren't here or weren't even born yet. 18-year-old Sol Pais was not born then. Her infatuation, as the FBI described it, with this certainly is striking.
It's been one of those underlying things, I think, for press, for families, for law enforcement in this state for a number of years, is this continued fascination with the shootings themselves. This is an event. Had it happened, I think about this today. Had this event happened 6 months ago, not the week of the Columbine shooting,
right,
would this be a completely different narrative? Would we be talking about something completely different? Instead, because it's the week of the 20 years coming up on Saturday of the Columbine shootings, because of that, do we have a completely different narrative? I suspect we do, and this is just a week. You don't mess around with things.
Right.
Columbine has learned this and knows this year after year after year. They've dealt with scares. They've dealt with other things for years. And because of that, they take precautions. Now what we're seeing is what happened at Columbine, and the precautions they take had to be taken district-wide and then city-wide. And that's unprecedented.
Well, you also know that law enforcement was aware of that, too, that their sensitivity was certainly heightened going into the week. And when this tip triggered that sensitivity, you can imagine law enforcement took it beyond seriously.
Yeah, think about the timeline here. You've got the FBI in Miami that alerts the FBI here in Denver of an 18-year-old who is fascinated with Columbine coming to Denver. They then do a check on her, and they discover that she has purchased a shotgun in Denver not long after landing here in Denver. And then they learn that she's been dropped off in a fairly remote area in Jefferson County. So a lot of these things, people are wondering all over the area right now, why were so many schools were closed? The problem was that there were a lot of unknowns with this, but
yeah,
the warning signs are there. Columbine infatuation, purchase a shotgun, go to an area, get dropped off. So that all sort of lends itself to that massive response that we saw.
So this one young woman was able to basically paralyze 500,000 students, families as well, and it makes you wonder about, what's next. Is there more? I mean, we'll focus on this case for the day, but it certainly makes you wonder about what people think about how this played out, how this plays out.
There will be a lot of analysis of this, because at the end of the day, you can't forget the fact that this all happened because of one person who came in from out of state, who, as of now, we can't even say did anything illegal.
The police, the FBI made that clear last night in the press conference. At this point, they had not considered her to have done anything that they were aware of that was illegal. They were going to have to come up with
that's
some sort of case.
And there'll be, trust me, there'll be plenty of time for analysis of that. I think, and there'll be an important discussion to be had. But at the end of the day, the good news is that the scare is over. There are school superintendents all over the metro area right now that are breathing that sigh of relief, that are being able to say, we can tell our students tomorrow that school's going to return to normal and that your students are going to be safe.
FBI says no longer a threat.
So the FBI is now telling us that they no longer consider it a threat. So they have either captured or neutralized 18-year-old Sol Pais. The FBI continues to get more information. We'll continue to share it with you. We have crews on the way to the scene as well. For law enforcement, as you talk about analysis, this will also be described as a victory, as a case where they sprung into action and within 24 hours went from learning of it to ending it.
This is a good day. Yesterday, the communication, and not from a law enforcement standpoint, but the communication was muddled across school, and there were loads of parents across the metro area who were incredibly frustrated about the communication that came to them. Because we all know this started with a handful of schools around Columbine yesterday around the noon hour, and it sort of ballooned. And then at 2:45 yesterday, the Colorado Department of Education puts out that warning, in essence, saying, it's up to schools if they want to close or if they want to go on lockout. It's up to them. And then everything and that's when the school district started saying, okay, maybe this is something else.
We will now have time also, considering the possibility that this is a capture and Saul Pais is still alive, to understand how this came to be, how this young woman came to be, because we always try to go back through and deconstruct who these people are, where they come from, how they get here, because this is a strange place to be, to say the least, where she ended up as far as threatening all these people.
What would cause an 18-year-old from Florida, and there you're looking at her face right there, what would cause an 18-year-old from Florida in the Miami Beach area to become so obsessed with a story that happened 2 years before her birth, fly out to Colorado, apparently on her own, purchase a shotgun, and then, in essence, terrorize a community, maybe knowingly, maybe not knowingly, in the area she was in, she was found in. It's entirely possible she may not have known the extent of what had been happening in the Denver area. Who knows?
And what was her plan? These are other things.
That's the central question I think law enforcement will try to get, because you notice the FBI said in that press conference last night that we will try. I thought one of the more interesting quotes that they said in that press conference late last night was, we will try to do everything we can to hold her as long as possible.
Right. Legally possible.
Which is indicative of, at this point, we don't have charges.
But they were far more proactive than they would have been without this history. Without this history here, without this timing, they were far more proactive than you think. Than I speculate they might have been.
And then everything really ramps up this morning. You know the area that they're going to concentrate in, that area of Jefferson County, and by the FBI's account now, they got her. The scare is over. This sort of almost 24 hours of sort of wondering what in the world is going on. At least we have an answer to that. But law enforcement, they have been all over this, and when you put a face out, when you put a name out like they did yesterday, you know you're going to get leads and tips that are going to lead you in every which direction. But they stayed in that area that they were concentrating on and sort of saying, this is the area we're going to focus on. And it paid off this morning.
And I think that publicity was how you knew how serious they were. They did not operate in any sort of secrecy. They wanted the public engaged. They wanted people to know. It added to the urgency of the moment. Our Noel Brennan is over at the FBI's Denver headquarters, and he joins us now with the latest on what they're saying out there. Noel?
Hey, Tom, you talk about that effort to get the message out. The FBI field office in Denver, they released this information through Twitter. That's how we found out and were able to confirm the information. We have not spoken to anyone in person out here. So the latest news from the FBI was tweeted out and given the all clear that there's no longer a threat to the community. Absolutely great news. We're going to be standing by out here at the Denver field office, waiting for the FBI. Imagine they will have some words for us out here at some point today. But we've just been following the news on Twitter, only got here a few minutes ago, and standing by, guys, until we are able to actually talk to the FBI out here and ask them some questions about how all of this went down this morning and how they were able to end this.
Yeah, there's a lot to consider here, and we were just talking, Chris and I, about how the FBI Denver, using Twitter and the hashtag Find Saul. I mean, they definitely wanted everybody possibly to be on the lookout for Saul Pais.
Absolutely. That hashtag was everywhere. FBI Denver field office using it. Her picture was plastered everywhere. No doubt people throughout this whole community, Denver metro area, Colorado and beyond, knew who they were looking for.
18-year-old Saul Pais, no longer a threat to the community. Noel Brennan over at FBI headquarters in Denver. We'll be checking back with you in just a couple of minutes. No longer a threat to the community. They're still leaving this open a bit. We've heard some reports of her being captured, so we'll continue to try to get updates from the scene.
And I think really the focus is now is sort of, there may be a sort of a criminal aspect to this. We don't know. There may not. But the most important thing is, think about all the schools that were closed today. Think about all the parents that were wondering what to tell their own children. I made that decision this morning with my own daughter of, what do you tell an 8-year-old? My daughter's 8 years old. What do you tell an 8-year-old daughter
Your Twitter
about what's
feed this
going
morning,
on?
I thought, was very, it engaged people because it was about what everyone was going through, about, how do you manage this? Because now, sadly, kids grow up knowing the difference between a lockout and lockdown and a secure perimeter, and they do drills, and it's scary, and I guess felt to be necessary.
Yeah, it's one of those things that it's the era that we live in. And think about this. Saturday, again, 20 years since, and I've been working on a project for more than a month now that will air later on this week that talks about some of the impacts of Columbine. The impacts of Columbine are so far-reaching. The impacts of Columbine are why we saw the response that we saw in the last 24 hours. It is a far-reaching event that has impacted some. There's so many people in Colorado now that were not here 20 years ago when this happened, but this was a change, just a change event for this entire community to have sort of gone through this and witnessed it. And law enforcement went through that too.
Well, it changed law enforcement, it changed laws, it changed schools, it changed families. It obviously changed some lives most dramatically, those people most directly involved, those students there that day, as well as those 12 students and teacher who were killed and their families. But the way people respond now, and sadly we continue to grow more skilled, more adept at these drills of how do we respond to these types of threats.
Pete Williams, NBC confirmed she's dead, self-inflicted.
Okay, so we're getting confirmation from NBC News, Pete Williams, that Saul Pais is dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
So as the FBI was saying, no longer a threat to the community. Pete Williams telling us that she has in fact taken her own life. So many of the questions about Saul Pais will have to be answered by other people. So we continue to report that.
And that's something that, Tom, we can now confirm as well. 9 wants to know, and 9 News can confirm that as well.
That Saul Pais is dead, apparently taking her own life at the Echo Lake Lodge, the 18-year-old who's caused so much turmoil over the past 24 hours. The FBI, local law enforcement, all trying to find her and also trying to piece together everything from her trail in Florida to everything she had done once upon arrival here in Colorado. All of that from yesterday, arrival at DIA, as the FBI said, to a store to buy a shotgun, to get ammunition, to going into hiding, basically.
And that's what can happen now. I mean, there's not going to be sort of necessarily the criminal aspect for her. That now they'll sort of backtrack and say, where was she at these given times? It seems like we know. A lot of those details have already sort of been...
Right. They were made public.
They know where she purchased this weapon. They know where she went. They know where she was found, obviously, today. So a lot of these pieces have already been sort of filled in. I think the backstory is going to be going back to a lot of this investigation will now sort of concentrate on Florida and what caused an 18-year-old to come out here. And we may be dealing with a story that we don't even know about yet, because I sort of think back, there was a lot of NBC and a lot of other crews were at her parents' house yesterday, trying to contact her parents. Her parents are obviously concerned about this as well. So this now sort of shifts back in some ways to what led to this. And again, was there a crime to begin with?
Was there a crime to begin with, and was there a crime planned? The sequence
Precisely.
of events certainly pointed a direct arrow towards harm being done, potentially at a school, potentially at students, but whether or not she left any sort of information about what her plan was, or whether she had told a friend or used some social media to indicate what her plan was, that has yet to come out or has yet to be made public. But I think many people want to know, what was your intention? And for a lot of us, how in the world did you get there?
Why did you purchase a shotgun?
Yeah.
Right?
That seems pretty...
I mean,
pretty clear
why do you
step.
come and within a short period of time and landing here in Denver, why do you purchase a shotgun? That's what alarmed law enforcement. And so they see that and they hear that, and that's why they do what they did. But what and I can't help but think, and again, I'm sort of concentrated because it is the week that it is. I can't help but think of all of the parents of the Columbine victims, of all of the survivors that know this is going to be a difficult week to begin with.
Yes.
They knew going in. It's 20 years. For many of them. This is a time that they continue to dread. And then now this sort of refocuses in on this and takes away some of the focus that probably should have been placed on really uplifting stories that have happened to survivors and families and all these stories that have happened since Columbine. And now we're sort of focusing in on this sort of singular name of Columbine. Again, it sort of enters into the national discussion. And that's difficult.
It also puts us back in the discussion, as we've had many times in these events, about the person, the individual, their fame, their notoriety, the people who caused the havoc, and how that's managed by people, how that's managed by media.
We collectively, and I say collectively, I mean us in the press as well, we collectively need to figure out a better way to sort of deal with these type of phenomenon. We have now, Columbine, you think of the number of shootings, mass shootings that have been inspired by, think about how many times you've probably read these stories on the air, inspired by the Columbine killers. They had been researching Columbine before this. And I think we have some sort of role in all of this. I don't think we've figured it out yet, but there's a problem that this country has. And we haven't figured it out yet, but there are hosts of people that continue to be fascinated by a discussion of Columbine. When the discussion should be turned to, in my mind, there's thousands of great stories that have happened since Columbine.
Well, there will also be quite a TikTok done on police. And
absolutely.
The Clear Creek County Sheriff's Office ultimately either challenging or coming across the 18-year-old up at Echo Lake Lodge and ending it or having it end around them, what the FBI did, what the Jefferson County Sheriffs did, and how they were able to piece this together, warn people, and also bring it to an end.
I think we already have a sense of how some of this sort of came together. We have the sense of this drop-off that occurred yesterday in this exact area, generally speaking.
Right.
I mean, there's a big area in Jefferson County, and there's lots of roads. There's a lot of sections that are remote.
Open space.
Right, a lot of open space. But we know that she was dropped off there. So those pieces are starting to put together. But this was, as the FBI called it last night, a massive manhunt. And they had people in the area, and they came across her today. And it leads to this sort of resolution, if you will, of this scare that has existed in Denver for 24 hours.
And theoretically, a return to normal in what we already know is a difficult week for schools here in Colorado, this 20th year since the Columbine shooting. And now what was already going to be a difficult week, now as you talked about, the air around it has changed again by what is happening in the present. So we have many people joining us now at 11 o'clock. We want to bring you up to date on what has happened. 18-year-old Saul Pais, the subject of a massive manhunt, has been found dead up near the Echo Lake Lodge, apparently from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. That's from 9 Wants to Know reporting. Of course, she'd been the subject of a massive manhunt after apparently behaving in a way that threatened schools, including in this week of the 20th year since the Columbine shooting. And we now know that she is no longer a threat, according to the FBI, and we are reporting again that she is now dead from a self-inflicted gunshot.
Yeah, let's go to that area of Jefferson County between Denver and Mount Evans. If you know the area, I mean, obviously lots of Echo Lake is a popular area for a lot of people in Colorado. It's the road up to Mount Evans. It's that section that sort of they had been concentrating on over the last 24 hours, and that's where they found her today, and that's where they said that she had that self-inflicted gunshot wound. So more to sort of piece together. But the headline of the day is that this scare is over for now.
And all these schools shut down today, locked out yesterday. So many families, so many students, once again, having to deal with the specter of violence, if not violence itself. Noel Brennan, again, is over at the FBI headquarters in Denver, joining us with what we know at this point from what the FBI has to say about the end of what has been a crazy 24 hours. Noel?
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. And we watched this kind of play out through social media, the updates from FBI Denver. I just want to read you a couple tweets because really this all played out in the last 35 minutes or so. FBI Denver tweeting, "We can confirm there is investigative activity around the base of Mount Evans. The investigation is active and ongoing. More information will follow soon." That was 33 minutes ago. And then 17 minutes ago, they tweeted this update. "There is no longer a threat to the community. More information to follow shortly." So it is that information that we are out here waiting to hear from the FBI. We imagine at some point they may come out to talk to us. We are right outside of the field office here in Denver. Have not seen a whole lot of activity with officers or FBI agents leaving or coming or going. Obviously, everything is pretty much concentrated right now, we understand, at Echo Lake, where we know this all ended not too long ago. The information coming from 9 Wants to Know, confirming through law enforcement sources that Sol Pais had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, as we've been reporting. So obviously, we hope to answer some questions, lingering questions from FBI, and we hope, guys, that they'll come out here and we'll be able to get some of those questions answered.
All right, Noel, thanks very much. We'll check back with you in just a few minutes. You think about how this worked and the coordination of law enforcement, because it will now be the FBI's case to try to figure out Sol Pais, who she was, why she ended up here. It was the Clear Creek County Sheriff's Office, apparently, that actually came across Sol Pais up there at Echo Lake Lodge, but the Jefferson County Sheriff Office involved as well, and it was I think one of the deconstructions of the Columbine shooting of 20 years ago was the networking and coordination of law enforcement that proved to be difficult that day, and they have certainly spent every bit of 20 years trying to improve that every day.
You think of the lessons that have been learned post-Columbine. The most important one of them being is that we sort of law enforcement tactics have changed tremendously over 20 years. The most important one being of them is that SWAT teams no longer wait to go into buildings. And that has had a tremendous impact on law enforcement response all over the country. That's been huge. And the world has changed in 20 years. In some ways, I was talking to a number of parents of the victims within the last month or so. And in some ways, for them, it's like it doesn't feel like 20 years. I know for a lot of people in our newsroom, it doesn't feel like 20 years.
No, and I think there's a very big difference when you discuss, as we will, because it is 20 years since the Columbine shooting, people above 35, let's say, who were 15 when it happened, people below that age, it's a different view. It's a different vista. If you were here, it's different than if you were somewhere else.
Think about all the students who are in high school today, students at Columbine, who were not alive when this happened. I was talking to a number of teachers. We were talking to a number of teachers over at Columbine who were students at Columbine when this all happened, and now they're teaching their students, and they say their students are very curious about it. They want to know sometimes. But they learn about this in books. They learn about this from teachers or watching something on the web. They were not alive when this happened. And so it has that sort of interesting impact. Yeah, there's some distance. There's some distance from that. In some ways, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, it continues to have an impact, and that's the sad thing. You just alluded to it a few minutes ago when we think of this woman who was born after the shootings and yet impacted by them apparently enough to want to come and do something or to become famous or to add her name or whatever might have been her motivation. There have been others as well in the course of these 20 years between then and now.
I can't help but think also about this 18-year-old in... we've gotten a lot of questions about people asking, an 18-year-old can come to Colorado and purchase a shotgun. In the state of Colorado, an 18-year-old can come and purchase a shotgun, purchase a long rifle. There's nothing, the federal law allows that. She would have had to have gone through a background check. There's going to be questions asked about, were there warning signs that could have been picked up? We're already having a lot of discussion online, other people sort of bringing up red flag and the law that was just recently signed by Governor Polis into law. There's a lot of discussion about that, but again, it's inevitable. When you have something like this, there's going to be a lot of talk and discussion about how do we prevent this from happening in the future. And one of those inevitable things that you're going to do is, why was she allowed to purchase a shotgun in the state of Colorado? There was nothing, at least on the surface, there's nothing wrong about this. She did everything, by all appearances, everything legally, and was legally entitled to do so. And I'm certainly not suggesting that it shouldn't have been. But there was an 18-year-old who did this. Were there any warning signs that could have been seen beforehand, whether by her parents, whether by the FBI, whether by the court system? Was she involved in the court system? Any of these things that could have sort of sent a warning sign to say, like, you know what? Not today. Don't know.
So this 18-year-old kept 500,000 students from school today with her apparent threat of violence, and that impact is not just 500,000 students not going to school. It's also one of those things where these kids will all remember the threat as much as they'll remember not going to school for the day. They'll remember this specter, the fact that this looms, that it's there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have Nelson Garcia on the phone from Jefferson County. Nelson, can you hear us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Go ahead.
So we are here at the Jefferson County School headquarters. We are getting set up for a press conference that's going to start at 11:30. We're waiting to hear from the superintendent of schools, Jason Glass, the head of Jefferson County Security, John McDonald, and also the Jefferson County Sheriff will be here as well. We're hoping to find out more official information on what has happened within the past few hours, but certainly we are hearing that things have changed. We've confirmed from sources here that Sol Pais was found dead, and that the tone has certainly changed here at the school district headquarters, considering the events that have happened in the past hour or so. We're hoping to get more information once the press conference starts at 11:30, and we'll certainly make that available so we can carry that live.
Nelson, because it is this week, it is, as Chris and I have been alluding to, a very different week. We have already seen, before this even happened, more security out at Columbine than you would have normally seen. The Jefferson County School District, one of those areas with that heightened sensitivity even before this whole story broke yesterday.
Absolutely, and actually, this is something that the district is used to every year around this time. Obviously, with this year being 20 years after the shootings, there was more attention placed on what's been going on at Columbine. But every year since the shootings, security has been heightened around Columbine every year in the past 20 years. And as you probably know, Columbine High School has not had classes on April 20th since the shooting. Number one, because of security reasons, and number two, because it's something that the victims and the victims' families, at least until now, have said that they do not want classes to resume on this day. So, they are used to it. They know that at this time of the year, there's always an increase in threats surrounding Columbine. Certainly what has happened this week has surpassed what normally goes on year after year.
Yeah, they usually have a day of service instead for those students and faculty and those at Columbine High School. Nelson, we'll check back with you in a few minutes. I know that news conference coming up in about 20 minutes with Superintendent Jason Glass, and we'll also talk about security in Jefferson County.
Think about the school districts had a phone conference call early this morning.
3:30?
To talk about what they were going to do. And it's interesting, I noticed that a lot of schools didn't wait for that conference call to even be done. They decided. I looked at, and I got an alert from Denver Public Schools. My daughter's in Denver Public Schools, alerting saying we're going to go ahead and cancel school for the day. And I think their alert came over. I look at my phone about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. A number of other school districts followed suit. Cherry Creek School District was one of the first earlier in the night to sort of make that decision. And it really was. I was talking to Kyle Clark about this subject last night. Was that the school districts, faced with this idea that, hey, you have an option here. You can stay open tomorrow or you can close. What school districts, once that sort of is out there, that possibility that we are going to cancel school today, once that possibility is out there, what other decision do they have?
And many parents had already, especially via social media, you can gauge, the public. there were many parents who'd already made that decision for the school districts, that they weren't sending their kids. It was one day, and they felt they'd be much better off staying at home, staying safe, and taking that decision out of the district's hands. And then all of the districts fell in line.
And now, I mean, what's interesting is now how are the districts going to respond? You would assume that everything sort of starts to sort of return to some sense of normalcy tomorrow. Kids will be back, you assume. You assume that there'll be some sort of communication. I've already received some communication from my daughter's school about, my daughter's 8, about having that conversation with your child about, well, how do you communicate this? And I'm a believer in openness and honesty, and I will have an open and honest, to an extent, conversation with my daughter. But it's now this sort of, how do things begin to return to normal in a very, very abnormal week? This is unprecedented.
This week continues too. It will still be this week,
Yep.
tomorrow and Friday. And whether your daughter is 8 or whether your daughter is 17, it's one of those discussions that you have with your daughter, but they'll also have with 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds,
Absolutely.
17-year-olds, and what they say to one another, as well as what their teachers and what their schools say to them, all goes into this mix. And it's an incredible mix to ask an 8-year-old to sort out.
But this is the world we live in today, right? I mean, there parents all over the country have had difficult conversations with their 8-year-old children for a number of years now. And this is just sort of, this is the country we live in today. And this is the situation that we have, where we can have one day, and this day will be remembered for a long time, where one person, and with a not as yet clear intent, came to Colorado and closed down school districts all over the area. And that is again, I hate using the word unprecedented, but in this case it fits.
Well, we've had schools, shut for snow, and schools shut for flooding, and you get in the basement in a tornado.
Right.
This is a brand new avenue that we've walked down.
And let's hope that we sort of get better at this. Newsrooms get better at this.
Yeah.
All of us sort of get better at this in terms of how we sort of communicate. A lot of people were sort of upset with us because we were broadcasting her name and face. And Tom, you know this very well. We are in a newsroom where we have made you will not hear the names of the Columbine killers on our air this week at all. But when you're faced with the FBI saying, put this out here.
Well, there will be an evolution now in the newsroom from 18-year-old Saul Pais going from someone that you needed to see and know her name and be looking for, and everyone needed to be looking for, to where she will now, from a media standpoint, be referred to in far more generic terms. And but as we've been talking about, I think there are people, though, including people who do what we do, who want to know where she came from,
Absolutely.
who she was, and why she got here, and what drove her to this. Because oftentimes I say, I don't really think I'll ever understand, and I'm glad, because I don't have that inside of me that I know of, and I want to know what in the world triggered this.
But we want to know. There's a reason why we want to know that. There's a reason why we want to know, because we want to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
Whether it be a school shooting or a scare. And so how do we sort of go back and sort of analyze what happened in this person's life that sort of caused them to do this? And again, I think it's so important to state here is that if she would have been caught alive, would there have been charges? We don't know that.
Well, we've been talking about that at great length, and I think ultimately, if you are in fact terrorizing people, even by intimation, is that enough?
Not necessarily.
Yeah,
it could be. It absolutely could be. I'm not trying to downplay what she did in any way, but it's not 100% clear. And we don't have to go down that road now, but we do have to sort of ask ourselves what happened, and make sure and make sure that we don't have a city that could come to a standstill, at least school-wise, because of the actions of one person.
Well, and you wonder, would that have happened if it was not this week?
I don't think so.
And that's February. If this was November, and if it wasn't here, of course.
This was always going to be a different week.
Yeah.
We've been preparing for this week here at 9 for more than a year. We've been talking about how our coverage is going to be centered, what we're going to be focusing on. So this week was always going to be different from a media perspective. It was always going to be different from a law enforcement perspective. You go by Columbine High School right now, and earlier in the week, and they had what they do all the time, and they had even more so private security guards, because they get looky-loos. They get people that are curious. They get press wanting to take shots. They get press wanting to interview kids. And during this week, it was always going to be a different week, and I think that absolutely has an impact in what you saw here.
You can be a skeptical guy at times, and did you in your gut think something was going to happen? I had a hunch that it wasn't, that there was enough sensitivity, and while there might have been something small or something dumb,
Wow.
nothing like this.
This was an outsider.
An outlier, an outsider, yeah.
Outlier and an outsider
Yeah.
that came in to call. The fascination with what happened 20 years ago does not just sort of exist within this city, within this metro area, within this state. It exists around the world, and you did have that inclination that something might happen.
Something might happen. I just thought that it wouldn't. I thought that
Well, you would
we
hope.
would get through. Oh, you certainly hope. That's for
Right.
sure. So, we are continuing to try to piece together what has happened this morning. But the FBI again saying that Saul Pais is no longer a threat. 9 wants to know reporting she has taken her own life. The Clear Creek County Sheriff's Office coming across the 18-year-old from the Miami area at the Echo Lake Lodge. This had been a massive manhunt, descriptions of what she had done, what she was wearing, even things that she had said, including that possibility that she had this infatuation with Columbine. There was an abundance of caution from law enforcement yesterday, certainly plenty of sensitivity and awareness to the week that it is here in Colorado. Yesterday, we saw so many schools lock out. Today, we saw schools just not even open. And we're talking about the largest school districts. It basically took Denver and the suburbs and shut all the schools down for the day.
Yeah, you sort of the national perspective on this, particularly yesterday, was really sort of focused on Columbine High School. And, again, you sort of go back in time, and yesterday it sort of evolved in this newsroom. We get word that there's been a lockout at Columbine High School and the 12 neighboring schools. And there was sort of like, okay, what's going on? And then everything sort of balloons from there. This has evolved from this is not just a Columbine story. This is a Denver metro area, Cherry Creek, Douglas, Denver, Jefferson County, all these massive school districts, and sort of, telling parents in the middle of the morning, there's no snowstorm outside, but you're gonna have to tell your kids you're not going to school today.
And the evolution of the story yesterday was interesting to note as well, because it went from, as you said, a couple of schools to other schools to many schools, but information was not really coming forward. And pretty soon, suddenly, almost like a burst pipe, the FBI wanted people to know who they were looking for, exactly who. Once they had this woman's picture, once they had her name, where she was from, they wanted it out. And they even went to that hashtag Find Saul, but they were very open in trying to engage the public and helping them find her as quickly as possible, which they ultimately did up on the road towards Mount Evans at the Echo Lake Lodge this morning. Saul Pais dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Told that the Clear Creek County Sheriff's Office was the one that actually was first on the scene there. So we're not sure if there was any sort of confrontation. We're going to get a full update. The Jefferson County Sheriff is going to be speaking as well at the Jefferson County Public School presser coming up in about 10 minutes. So we'll be carrying that for you, and maybe more information there as well.
You could see it on Sheriff Schrader's face, Jefferson County, yesterday during that last night during that press conference. This was a tough week for his department.
Yeah.
And you could see this was the last thing they want to be doing on a week like this. They had loads of preparations, and yet they did it this morning. Ended. What's also interesting, I was going back in time, I was looking at Colorado Department of Education. This is what, in my mind, changed everything yesterday. 2:48 yesterday, Colorado Department of Education put out a tweet that said, due to a credible threat to schools by an individual identified by the FBI, the Department of Public Safety recommends all schools in the Denver metro area conduct a lockout and controlled release immediately. More info to come. Now, that tweet came at 2:48. A lot of schools had already closed by
Yeah,
then.
it was time.
The schools had let out. Some schools were still letting out. So that was just a tough time to get that news. But that's what the state put out at that time. And then there was this sort of scramble of communication. I said on the air last night, I mean, I got my notification that my daughter's school was on lockout at 7:15 p.m., 4 hours after she had already left the school grounds. So the communication was difficult. And there's going to be analysis of that. 99 Wants to Know will be looking into that. But and the time for that will come. But in the meantime, it was sort of this sort of evolution of this story that was happening all day yesterday and then obviously continued into this morning.
You mentioned Jefferson County Sheriff Schrader and that news conference last night and the urgency that was felt from the FBI, from the Jeffco Sheriff's Office, from Stan Hilke as well. And then you take it through this morning. Normally, when a case like this ends for police, there is a sense of relief. But it's April 17th. It's Wednesday. This week isn't over.
Yeah,
and it's not over for the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. The FBI Office of Denver, they are still, I'm sure, very concerned about anything that might be like this, different than this, but still meant to do harm with Columbine attached to it.
Inevitably, there's going to be, I hate to use the word on edge, it's a terrible term, but it's sort of that sort of term that fits in my mind right now. People will be more apprehensive. It was inevitable going into this week anyways, and now because of this, and you're right, we are a number of days away. Presumably school districts are going to try to return to some sense of normalcy tomorrow, and sort of there's that idea. When you put out a story like this and it gets national, international attention, it's inevitable. There's going to be more discussions, there's going to be more scares, there's going to be more, hopefully nothing on the level of this, but there's going to be, people are going to be sensitive, and in many ways that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
I'm sensitive to these subjects and sort of paying attention to things that just don't seem right.
Sensitive is one thing, not being able to sleep at night, not being able to walk into school freely, not being able to drop your kids off and go to work freely of mind. That is, I think, the shadow that is going to stay over this area through the weekend. And it would have anyway, but it is a darker shadow now.
What happened 20 years ago has always been personal for so many people. Yeah. It became even more personal for parents all over the metro area within the last 24 hours. What happened 20 years ago has now impacted what happened this week. And for parents that were sort of having those discussions last night and this morning, and then getting word from their school district their school is going to be closed, this became a deeply personal event for thousands of parents all over the metro area.
Well, it's going to also be a matter of endurance going forward for people in the metro area as well as law enforcement, because everything from actual potential threats to hoaxes and other things, wastes of time, wastes of emotion, wastes of energy, are probably also in the forecast. So it's how this was reacted to clearly affects people in many ways.
We have a great mechanism in the state of Colorado that came out after Columbine in terms of Safe to Tell, and it really sort of transformed schools. We talk about the change in law enforcement. Safe to Tell really sort of opened up the idea that it was okay for students to report something that concerned them to somebody else, and that in a way that didn't exist maybe in the days prior to what happened 20 years ago. And we are still in that situation now, and students will be reminded this, if something seems strange, if you want to, and these reports come in on a daily basis to Safe to Tell, and we sort of transform that aspect of sort of Colorado and Colorado schools as well.
I want to get back over to Nelson Garcia. Again, he is at Jefferson County Public Schools headquarters, where in about 5 minutes we're going to be getting an update from the school district and from Jeffco Sheriffs as well. Nelson?
Yeah, we're here up in the boardroom on the 5th floor. They have the room set up to have the press conference here in about 5 minutes or so. We're expecting to hear from Superintendent Dr. Jason Glass, the Director of Safety and Security, John McDonald, and also the Jefferson County Sheriff, Jeff Schrader. We are trying to learn more information as to what has happened this morning. We're getting unconfirmed reports even here that Pais was indeed found dead, but we're hoping to find more information, especially from Sheriff Schrader, Schrader once he takes the podium. We'll be streaming this press conference when it starts here in a few minutes online and also live for you guys as well. And we'll obviously let you know what we find out as soon as we hear it.
Nelson, we were just talking about the difference between normally at the end of a case or a hunt like this, there is a sense of relief, but with this week continuing, I imagine we're not necessarily going to feel any sort of relief that this particular case may have come to an end today.
Well, actually, I just talked with former Columbine principal Frank DeAngelis. He is here as well. I don't know if he's going to talk. He might, but just talking with him privately, he did say he felt a sense of relief based on the news from this morning. So obviously, there's a lot of tension that surrounds Columbine every year on this time, 20 years after the shooting. There's certainly a lot of attention surrounding Columbine, and there will be continuing from today all the way through Saturday. But after hearing the events of this morning, there certainly is a different tone here at the district headquarters. Certainly a sign, a sense of relief, and certainly less stress regarding this particular situation. But there are ongoing threats. They continue to receive threats related to Columbine, as they have every year since the shootings.
All right, Nelson, thanks. We'll be back with you in just a couple of minutes when that news conference gets underway at Jeffco Public Schools. He mentions Frank DeAngelis, a man who became famous, obviously for the terrible reasons, but the way he was able to help shepherd that school through also became kind of a blueprint as well. He became quite a fixture in the lexicon, the playbook of how you manage something after something horrible happens. 15
more years. He went on to be principal of that school, and after offering to resign shortly after the shooting to the school board and that resignation being declined, he now travels around the country talking to schools and school districts about how to prevent these things from happening in the future. He is an encyclopedia, sadly, of school shootings that have taken place around the country, because he talks to those principals when that happens, when they're 1 year out of their shooting. Like Parkland, the principal at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, was speaking to Frank DeAngelis about what do we do a year after the shooting? How do we sort of recognize it? How do we sort of be respectful? And that's a burden.
It's a terrible club to be a member of, and he was sadly really the first member, but the way he did manage it, and he didn't have a Frank DeAngelis to help him. So it was very interesting to watch him start to put that playbook together, what you do after this type of tragedy happens. We want to head back out there, Jefferson County, where they are starting to gather and sit down for that press conference, which hopefully we're going to be learning more about what specifically happened from law enforcement, from Sheriff Jeff Schrader, also about what the plans are going forward. So let's listen in over at Jefferson County Public Schools.
I think a lot of questions, it's Chris Vanderveen, there's a lot of questions about what they're going to say, what they're going to reveal, and really how the district's going to move forward in all of this. A lot of discussions yet to be had, but interested to hear what they say.
And the immediate reactions now that this apparently seems to have come to an end today.
Push the green button.
Thank you. There we go. Good morning, everyone. I'm Tammy Schiff. I'm the Chief Communications Officer for Jeffco Public Schools. We thank you for coming on such short notice. This morning, we will have 3 brief statements from the gentleman to my left. First, we'll have a statement from Jeffco Sheriff Jeff Schrader. Following will be our Superintendent, Dr. Jason Glass. And after that, John McDonald, our Executive Director for the Department of School Safety for Jeffco Public Schools. We will then take a few questions afterwards, and we appreciate brevity on those questions because we want to cover as many as possible, and apologize if we need to cut off. As you can imagine, there's a lot of things going on right now in Jeffco, and we're working things as they happen. So with that, Sheriff Schrader.
There's obviously been a lot of hard work by a lot of people throughout the Denver metro area. Information that came into the FBI it did create a significant amount of concern regarding what we believe is a credible threat, or had been a credible threat. And I know as many of you perhaps have already reported even. The FBI recently just confirmed that they have found Ms. Pais deceased from an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound, and I anticipate that they will be doing a further briefing with details of the entirety of their investigation a little bit later. Our focus over the course of the last 24 hours has been how can we keep our kids safe in schools, and a lot of ongoing conversation with our school safety partners in Jefferson County Public Schools, as well as law enforcement agencies throughout the Denver metro area, and school administration right here with Dr. Glass being heavily involved in conversations throughout that process. Obviously, we are concerned to get kids back to school, and so we're going to continue working with the school district, the school safety team, to make sure that we can do that in a safe manner, and that during this very important week to the Columbine community, that those events are carried off in a safe manner as well.
Thank you, Sheriff Schrader. I'd like to first address the breaking news on this issue by saying that we are relieved that the threat to our schools and community is no longer present, and I want to express deep gratitude to our partners in law enforcement, especially the Jeffco Sheriff's Office, for your vigilance in serving as guardians for the community's children. I also want to thank the Jeffco Public Schools staff for your professionalism, your commitment, and exemplary performance during this ongoing difficult period of time. I'm proud of you, and I appreciate you. I'm also deeply grateful for the support of the Denver metro area superintendents and other state leaders. While Jeffco was the epicenter of this threat, it extended across the whole metro area and affected us all. While this threat has been the most significant, it's not the only challenge facing our schools and our community in these days leading up to the Columbine anniversary. I appreciate our community's patience as we continue to navigate these difficult issues, and I'm always inspired by this community's capacity, resilience, and capacity for good in the face of unimaginable evil. Looking ahead, we're planning on returning to normal school operations tomorrow with heightened safety and security procedures and ongoing vigilance in the days to come. And the other events that were planned this weekend will continue as planned. Thank you, and I want to now turn things over to our Executive Director of School Safety and Security, John McDonald.
Thank you, Dr. Glass and Sheriff Schrader. The shadow of Columbine looms pretty large here in Jeffco, as it does across the state and the country. For us, the partnership that we have with the Sheriff's Office is something pretty special. There are a lot of lessons learned in 1999. Probably the biggest lesson was breaking down the silos and the ability to train together, to work together, to constantly communicate, to keep our 86,000 kids safe across this district is a foundational aspect of what we do. And when this threat came in, we are used to threats, frankly, at Columbine. This one felt different, it was different, and it certainly had our attention. We base our decisions based on the best intel we have at the time. And to close an entire metro area is not an easy decision, but at the end of the day, it's the right decision, the best decision to protect all of our kids. And to me, that's pretty important. It's critically important to everything that we do. A student that doesn't feel safe in school is not a well-educated student. They can't focus, they can't study, and they can't take that test. So we are blessed in Jeffco, frankly, to have support from 7 different law enforcement agencies that provide us school resource officers that are helping us protect our kids each and every day. I'm very thankful that this threat is over and we can get back to the business of learning. But we know that Columbine continues to attract people from around the world. And if I have any message, we're not a place to come visit if you're not a student. If you don't have business there, we're not a tourist attraction, and we're not a place for you to come and gain inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. And now we'll open it up to questions. Yes, right here.
Can you describe the circumstances surrounding the death of Ms. Pais? Were agents actively involved in pursuing her at the time when she took her own life?
I don't have that information, but I believe she was found on a search. But again, the FBI will be doing a more comprehensive briefing. They're currently processing the scene where her body was found to determine all of the factors that would lead to those conclusions. I don't know if she was, I don't believe that they were in active pursuit at the time that she was found dead, but again, they'll confirm that and the details surrounding it.
Sheriff, do you believe that there could be any persons associated with her? Is that a concern? And what is your involvement with the investigation right now?
Well, we've had staff on the Rocky Mountain Safe Streets Task Force that have been actively involved. We have had people in the command post during the course of the last 24 hours to aid in that investigation. We've had plenty of staff that have been boots on the ground searching different areas. Everything that I've heard in briefings does not indicate that she had any assistance or friends in the area, just a fascination with the Columbine area and the horrendous crime that went on there 20 years ago.
And I know you had said that this threat felt different. She did purchase a gun in Colorado. How did that play into this?
Well, for me, looking at school shooters and the history of what we've seen for the last 20 years, there's some real indicators that we look at. The fact that she was committed, purchased a plane ticket, not only purchased a plane ticket, but made that journey, that pilgrimage to Columbine. Once she got into our area, purchased a gun. Now, I say made the pilgrimage. I don't believe she ever made it onto Columbine property. I don't think that's ever been confirmed, but there was a pilgrimage here. And certainly she purchased a weapon, and those two things combined, along with her fascination of Columbine, that's pretty clear and convincing evidence that we have a threat to the school.
Can you please speak louder? It's harder to hear you. Thank you.
Where was the gun purchased?
I'm not going to reveal the gun shop, but it was in the Littleton area, not too terribly far from Columbine.
How do you know she was infatuated with the Columbine shooting?
The reports that have been in briefings have indicated that she had made statements to friends, family, and some online type postings or communications.
And before we take other questions, I also want to introduce Frank DeAngelis, who's the former principal of Columbine High School, who is here to answer any questions around connections to the historical Columbine events and then events related to the memorial this weekend.
John, can you talk about the fact that she is only one person, and granted that she did have a gun, but how was she able, as just one person, to generate so much concern and affect such a wide area, even though she had intent and only one person versus a department? How can you talk about the logistics of heightening up the awareness for that?
Well, I will say this, that we base all of our decisions on the intel that we have at the time. So from our perspective, the information that came into us, we made a decision based on what we need to do at Columbine. And then that extends to other areas within the Columbine articulation area to protect those immediate schools. Based on then further information that we were provided by law enforcement, we made decisions to place some of the mountain schools on lockout as well. So all of those decisions are not done in a vacuum or in a silo. It is constant communication back and forth, looking at what that threat is and having decision makers together. And we had good partners, mission partners that were looking at our entire school safety program and from the school district. Now that extended out metro-wide when we were advised that the threat was not as specific to Columbine. However, in my mind, the fascination with Columbine where she purchased the weapon, the fact that, you know, she made the journey here. For me, it's all about protecting our environment, our schools. That's how we made that decision.
Yes, over here. Thank you.
Was the purchase of a gun legal? And also, if she were still alive, what could law enforcement do in terms of containing the situation? Could she have been charged with something, or is law enforcement hands kind of tied in this type of situation?
Well, I don't believe our hands were tied in this type of a situation. Obviously, communication was ongoing. Do I know what charges could necessarily have applied in this case? No, not without additional information. And there were prosecutors as well as many law enforcement officers involved in that communication. Minimally, based on the information that we had, she certainly would have been subject to being taken into custody for a mental health hold, a 72-hour hold and treat, to determine a little bit more about the mental state and what risk there would have been posed. But minimally, that would have happened. Certainly, there was the potential for other charges, but absent additional information, I wouldn't be able to comment on what those would be.
Yes, over there, our person from the Post. Thank you.
In addition to the additional security tomorrow, do you anticipate there's going to be any need for additional mental health support or counseling?
Yes, after events like this, we typically deploy additional mental health support, counseling, make that available to our staff, our students, our families. Regrettably, this is not the only time situations like this have happened in Jeffco and in schools across the country. So it's a sad statement that we're becoming more used to handling situations like this, but we expect that there will be some grief and processing mental issues to contend with tomorrow.
Thank you. Back there.
Can you describe what you mean by heightened security tomorrow?
Yeah, we will not disclose what exactly that looks like, but it will involve processes and procedures at buildings regarding entrance into schools, operations of the school during the day, release of students at the end of the day, additional patrols using camera systems. So without going into details, it might reveal our systems of support. It's those sorts of things. And John may one.
You will, students will see, as they typically do. We are all over schools all day long, so they're very used to seeing us, and they'll continue to see us, and they'll see additional patrols in the near future.
And thank you. Over there.
And, you know, this question is for Frank. I know this is already an emotional, a difficult week. And for you, for families, I mean, when did you first learn about this? What did you think? I know you still have a relationship with these families. Have you talked with them? What are they thinking right now?
Yesterday, I was at Columbine High School when we went into lockout, and first thing I did is check in on about the 15 staff members who were there when the event happened 20 years ago, and then some families start reaching out to me and just to provide support for everyone. And, you know, it's very important that we continue to look at what happened 20 years ago, but at the same time not let it detract from what we're hoping to do this week. And the support was so great when Jeffco got together, everybody came together, and there was a confidence that was what we were working with, but it just takes us back. And I think you talk to most people that were part of Columbine High School, when that month of April comes, it does something to us all. But we have the support system in place, and we take care of each other. And, you know, we have that famous saying, we are Columbine, and during times like this, it resonates loudly and clearly.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Can you talk personally for you what you personally felt and thought when you heard about this, and your message to parents out there in the community impact?
The one thing that is so different from this time as opposed to 20 years ago is all the things that we have in place. Prior to that time, the only drills we did were fire drills. And yesterday, as soon as there was an alert to go in lockdown, Columbine High School acted so professionally. And the reason they did this is because of the training being done by the Jeffco Sheriff's Department and John's office. And so it was like clockwork. And I was there through the entire time, and the kids knew exactly what to do. There was support, And so that is much more reassuring than where we were 20 years ago. And so I think we know we have things in place now, lessons learned, and the support system is there. And so, again, we reach out to everyone, and the Jeffco schools have been fantastic, and Dr. Glass and his leadership has been fantastic, providing everything we've needed for Columbine as this 20-year remembrance approaches.
And Sheriff, I did just want to ask you the question about, was the gun purchased legally? And can you kind of explain the laws? A lot of people are asking, how she would be able to purchase a shotgun here in Colorado.
Yeah, the things that I've been briefed on, all appearances are that the firearm was purchased legally. I'm sure that there will be some ongoing evaluation in that regard by federal law enforcement officers, perhaps with the ATF, but every appearance is that it was purchased legally. One of the requirements when somebody purchases a gun or obtains a concealed handgun permit in the state of Colorado is that their fingerprints, that information is run through the Colorado InstaCheck program. And so that would be a requirement and provide the gun seller the legal right to sell that gun to an individual based on the information that they have there.
And could someone from the school speak to what the lead time was maybe when you found out about this potential threat and the seriousness of it and when action was taken? John.
I received a call from law enforcement, and as soon as I had that call from task force agent that placed it, I immediately called our school resource officer at Columbine, and we began within a minute of taking action and making decisions.
Can you describe the process with the other districts in the metro area? I've been here a long time. This is unprecedented to have hundreds of thousands of children affected.
Right.
Describe that process.
The Denver metro area superintendents coordinated closely on this. Of course, Jeffco was the epicenter of the threat, but as it was determined the threat wasn't specific to any one school, and we knew she was present in the metro area and clearly had developed means to move around from the airport into Littleton up to the foothills and the mountains. There was a concern that any of our schools could be targets until the situation was resolved. So we worked closely with law enforcement, the FBI, state law enforcement. The governor's office was involved. There were a lot of conversations, and collectively we stood together and made the decision to close all of the schools in the metro area today because the threat couldn't be determined. We did begin thinking about if this were to continue, then what? So what would we be doing tomorrow and the next day, and how would we adapt as school leaders and as our school systems to meet this new challenge? So that work was happening as of half an hour ago. We were still working on what that would look like in the face of this new threat. And I believe that this may not be the first time we see something like this. These things, we see copycat versions of threats and actions more commonly. And so we are developing systems and procedures on how we will react to situations like this in the future.
Will you close school again tomorrow?
We don't know. We were working on what changes to what school looks like would have to happen for us to be open. We did not wish to have one person hold all of the schools in the Front Range or the whole state hostage. We wanted to have a reaction to that to allow learning and our children's development to happen. So it would have required different transportation procedures, different processes for kids coming into schools, locking systems, patrols, food service. I mean, it's complex, the amount of changes that would need to happen, but we were working that problem and thinking about how do we change what school looks like on a normal day to how school looks like under this threat. And we fortunately didn't have to execute that, but we've saved it all because we may have to come back to it at some point. I think it may be helpful to not only Jeffco Public Schools, but other school leaders in the state or perhaps the country that may face this situation in the future.
Between 1999 and 2018, Colorado has experienced 8 school shootings. I think each of those school shootings that have occurred, we've learned a lot of lessons. and we're paying attention to what's happening around the country. So decisions that are made today are not decisions that we would have made in the past, and that's part of the learning. It's part of the training that we do each and every day. And in schools, we plan for two types of threats. We plan for the insider threat, potential student, and we plan for the outsider threat. So the practices, protocols, and programs that we have in place for the outsider threat came into play yesterday.
We have time for one more question.
How do you become aware of her presence here in Colorado?
Well, the FBI developed information. It came forward from the Miami FBI office to the Colorado FBI office, I believe after she was reported missing by her parents. And again, the FBI will, in all likelihood, be conducting a more thorough briefing, media briefing on the details of their case, and they probably would be better equipped to answer that. But if I could get back to the question that you asked, one of the goals of public safety is not only to reduce crime, but to reduce the fear of crime. I had the opportunity to listen in on the superintendent's calls last night and today, and the thoughtful deliberation that went on throughout the Denver Metro school superintendents. That was a large piece of it. Are kids going to be fearful? Are their parents going to be concerned with their kids? And ultimately, is that a good learning environment? But that's the thing that we work on hard every day, is to make sure that with our school safety partners, to make sure that the schools are safe and that kids are in an environment where they feel comfortable so that they can learn their very best.
How did she get around Jeffco? What was the ride?
I'm sure it will come out in the FBI briefing, but it was an Uber type of a system, I believe.
Okay. I think that wraps it up for us today. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate it. On behalf of Jeffco Public Schools, we are eternally grateful to our partners in our community who helped bring this to conclusion, and we appreciate your time and attention today. Thank you.
A briefing from leaders in Jefferson County, leaders in the school system, leaders in public safety there. Jeffco School Superintendent Jason Glass beginning his remarks by saying, "We are relieved." Speaking for a school district, speaking perhaps for a state. We are going to take a brief break and come back to recap what we have learned and what we are still waiting to find out.